Welcome back. It's time for Chapter 8 of the Saints of Snowville. Let's get started. Chapter 8. President Benson was furious. It was Sunday night, immediately after state conference, and he had Bishop Jackson on the phone. "You be in my office at the seminary building tomorrow at 8 o'clock. It is extremely important that you be there, and I don't want any excuses." Bishop Jackson knew what President Benson wanted to talk to him about, and fully expected to be released as bishop immediately. This day, June 6, 1937, had been state conference. Richard R. Lyman, of the Council of the 12 of Salt Lake City, had been a stake visitor. The first session of conference had been proceeding in a routine manner. The preliminary exercises over, Elder Lyman took his place at the pulpit. After clearing his throat, said in a monotone, "It is proposed that we sustain Heber J. Grant as prophet, seer and revelator, and president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. All in favor of this proposition, please manifest in the usual manner by raising the right hand." Every hand in the audience was raised immediately. Those opposed, by the same token, if there be any. Elder Lyman continued without looking up. "The voting appears to be unanimous." Lyman then hurried on in the usual superficial manner, sustaining the 12 apostles, the 7 presidents of 70, and the presiding bishopric. The saints all raised their hands in the affirmative in their perfunctory manner, with about the same amount of thought as takes place when the mouth opens as the elbow is bent. At this juncture Lyman said, "It is proposed that we move Bear Lake to Salt Lake County. All in favor of this proposition, please manifest it by the uplifted hand." All present, including President Benson, cast an affirmative vote. No negative votes were registered. Elder Lyman appeared to be enraged and spent the next 5 minutes taking the hide off the saints for not paying attention to what they were voting on. And he chastised them for taking this important procedure so lightly. From that day forward, the saints of the Bear Lake stake would pay more attention to what was going on in church. After this tirade, Lyman proceeded with the business of sustaining the stake authorities. When he asked if there were any who opposed sustaining the state clerk, Bishop Jackson raised his hand in opposition. The bishop was seated near the front and was in such a position that everyone, now paying attention to the proceedings, could see his negative vote. Lyman became a little frustrated and paused for almost a minute. Nothing like this had ever happened since he had been the general authority. After the hiatus, he turned to President Benson and had a brief conference. He then directed a few remarks to Bishop Jackson. "President Benson will hear you later on this matter." He went ahead with the proceedings, but was obviously annoyed. Bishop Jackson had a good reason to oppose sustaining Ivan West as state clerk, or so he thought. The bishop had no ambition for a higher position in the church, and was therefore not worried about what the stake presidency might think of his opposing vote. J.D. Jackson had had his West matter on his mind for several months, and had decided that what he was going to do when the time to register his protest came. He had not liked Ivan West for many years, and thought it was a disgrace to the church that he was permitted to maintain a position in the stake. The bishop thought it was time that somebody took a stand on this matter, and let the brethren know how he and others felt. Ivan West was a member of the prominent Bear Lake family. His grandfather had been one of the early settlers. Relatives of his had been in every stake presidency since the organization of his stake. His relatives had always held important positions in the stake and in the community. Ivan had been on a mission as a young man and had graduated from Utah State Agricultural College in Business Administration. For the past 10 years, he had been employed as an assistant cashier in the Paris State Bank. Ivan was fairly competent in his work, and he also moonlighted by keeping the books of the Consolidated Wagon and Implement Company and the local creamery. Elder West was a high-handed in his position in the bank, and because of his white-collar job and his family connections, he looked down socially on the ranchers and farmers who came into the bank with cow manure on their shoes. He had married into the Ricks family, and had always felt that he was a little bit superior to the ordinary run-of-the-mill saint in the Bear Lake stake. Brother West had 6 children, and was ambitious for their success. He found that the salary of an assistant cashier in a bank was not sufficient to support him and his family in a manner that they would like to become accustomed to. One of his boys was in college at Utah State Agricultural College, and another boy was in Eastern States Mission. Brother West started embezzling by taking a little money temporarily from the bank and using it for his own purposes. For a time, he was able to get the money back to the bank before the books were balanced at the end of the month. As his children became older, he required more money and found it more difficult to get his bank borrowings back in time. He started to do the same thing with funds from the wagon company and also the creamery. So that he could meet the audits, he juggled some funds back and forth among the bank and the other two businesses. This worked for very well for a time, but the amount that he had out of the companies and into his own funds became larger and larger. It was the custom of a number of ranchers to leave promissory notes with the bank, executed in blank. The purpose being that if an overdraft occurred, the people could execute a note to cover it. Usually in the fall, after the cattle were sold and the crops disposed of, the ranchers could pay up these promissory notes. Brother West executed a few of these notes left in the blank by the farmers to cover his withdrawals. He started out by appropriating only $200 or $300 for his own purposes, but after several years juggling funds back and forth between the three institutions and executing farmers' and ranchers' notes for his own purpose, he was behind about $7,000. The roof fell in when the bank examiner and auditors for the creamery checked the accounts at about the same time. Brother West didn't have sufficient sources from which to juggle funds. He scraped up all the money he could from relatives and borrowing, but he still was about $5,000 short. A clear embezzlement case threatened him, but relatives came to his aid. These relatives didn't particularly like Brother West, but thought it would be a family disgrace if he went to jail. The deficit in the bank was made up immediately, lest state or county authorities take up the matter and press for an embezzlement charge. There was still $2,000 to be paid to the creamery and the wagon company. It was agreed that Brother West would be given a year to make up these deficits. It was common knowledge in Bear Lake County that this embezzlement had taken place. Bishop Jackson did not particularly want to see West go to jail, but he thought that the least sanction that could be imposed against him was that he be relieved of his duties as state clerk. Apparently Bishop Benson gave no thought to such action. Bishop Jackson thought that this made the Mormon people look bad in the eyes of the Gentiles in the county. People were tried before Bishop's Court for the membership in the church because of the friendly adultery. They were relieved of positions of responsibility and authority if they used tobacco, and were not given positions of responsibility if they drank coffee. Bishop Jackson viewed these infractions of the word of wisdom as minor when compared to embezzlement and dishonesty. He had never known a person to be denied a position in the church because he was a thief or liar. Considering the traditional standards of the church, J.D. Jackson should never have been made bishop in the first place. If the usual practices of the church had been followed, Bishop Jackson's tenure as a common judge in Israel would have been short. After his faults and shortcomings were discovered in the ordinary course of events, he would have been eased out of the position as father of the ward. For all his faults, shortcomings, and factors going against him, he nevertheless presided over the Snowville ward for more than 30 years. Bishop Jackson retained one infraction of the word of wisdom as a one-man protest against the church's strong position of the word of wisdom. He continued to drink coffee throughout his term as bishop and to the end of his life. He made no secret about this practice. While he drank no coffee at home, Mary Jackson would not brew it for him in any event. He drank 1 cup of coffee at the cafe whenever he came to Paris. During his stewardship, he was frequently taken to task by the stake president for his practice. But his answer was always the same. He could give up the practice any time he desired, and it was a matter of protest rather than a habit. The bishop advised the stake president many times that the church did not seem to hesitate to put thieves, embezzlers, liars, and those who continually employed sharp business practices in positions of authority, such as bishops and high councilmen. He further stated that at such time as the church was a little bit more careful about whom they put in positions of leadership, he would cut out drinking coffee. Bishop Jackson believed throughout his life that the church worried too much about coffee drinking and neglected weightier matters of the law. The 89th section of the Doctrine and Covenants said nothing about the evils of coffee and tea. In the days of Joseph Smith, the brethren all drank coffee and tea. When the saints came west and were isolated in the valleys of the mountains, tea and coffee became very expensive because of transportation. Brigham Young was opposed to the saints squandering money for high-priced exotic food, and anyway, Brother Brigham didn't like tea or coffee. He decided that the best way to limit spending money on tea and coffee was to make it against the word of wisdom. And so it came to pass. Brigham Young liked to dance with the young ladies, so dancing was not made a violation of the word of wisdom. President Whitney had retired shortly after Elder Jackson was installed as bishop. Whitney was replaced by President Benson, who was very strict and surely would never have let J.D. Jackson become bishop. He had been stake president. He now had to contend with Bishop Jackson, and it would not be easy to get rid of him. It soon became painfully apparent that Jackson was the sort of person who would run his ward the way he desired and not seek much advice from the stake presidency. This was contrary to the nature of the disposition of President Benson, as he desired the ward bishops to come to him with all their problems and let him help decide. President Benson probably could have relieved Bishop Jackson of his duties for the failure to observe the word of wisdom. His operation of the ward contrary to church proceedings, and subordination, or many other things. The Bishop of Snowville ward only had one thing going in favor of retaining him as bishop. The one thing was that he got results. The per capita payment of tithing, fast offerings, and other donations was higher in Snowville ward than in any other ward in the stake. The percentage of attendance at sacrament meetings, priesthood meetings, and other meetings was higher in Snowville than any other ward in the stake. Bishop Jackson had a welfare project for his own going at least 5 years before Harold B. Lee dreamed one up in the Pioneer stake in Salt Lake City in 1936. There were no needy in Snowville ward, and no adult Aaronic priesthood members, although not all the saints lived the word of wisdom 100%. The results obtained by Bishop Jackson were always a mystery to President Benson. Benson assumed that if a person didn't live in the word of wisdom, he wasn't much good and that a bad tree could not bear good fruit. In the summer, Bishop Jackson loved to play baseball on Sunday with the boys and young men of the ward. They all repaired to the baseball diamond in the early afternoon and played vigorously until almost sundown. At this time, the bishop would usually observe that it was near time for sacrament meeting and say, "Well, fellers, let's go and get the damn thing over with." Whereupon every man and boy on the baseball diamond followed him to the church house for evening services. This was not the first time that the elder West had been in difficulty because of dishonesty. It was the first time, however, that his dishonest nature and generally known. Several people knew of the individual incidents taking place over a period of 25 years, where he had engaged in some petty larceny. About 5 years prior to the embezzlement episode, Brother West had gone with a group of saints to Logan for their monthly temple excursion. Several people at different times had indicated that on these excursions, Brother West went down and picked up a few things out of one of the jewelry stores or one of the 5 and 10 cent stores. He was rather callous about shoplifting and excused it by saying that it would cost him money to make these temple excursions, and that when he picked up a few articles in connection with them, his loss wasn't so great. Brother West likely caused the temple president to have padlocks on all the lockers in the dressing rooms at the temple. On one particular temple excursion, he picked up a wristwatch from the S.E. Needham jewelry store. One of the clerks caught him going out of the store with the watch in his pocket and detained him. West was taken to the back office where he confessed that he had taken the watch and intended to leave the store without paying for it. He begged the manager and the clerk to let him go without any publicity or prosecution. He was a good talker, but the Logan businessman had long been the prey of shoplifting saints from Bear Lake County, and also from Preston, and wanted to make an example of some of them. They were therefore determined that the Brother West would not get off. Elder West was detained in the office of the manager, and the city police were called on the telephone and asked to come and take him down to the station. The police were detained and did not arrive at Needham Jewelry for about 30 minutes. While they were waiting, the clerk who had detected West and who was watching him while being detained said that he would like to go to the Bluebird Cafe and get a cup of coffee and ask West if he would like to join him. Brother West was incensed at the proposal and said, "I have never touched a cup of coffee in my life. I am a member of the Mormon Church and a returned missionary, and would never think of drinking a cup of coffee." West was taken down to the police station and fined $10 and given a severe warning. Very few of the saints in Bear Lake County knew anything about this, but a few, including Bishop Jackson, who read the Logan Herald Journal, saw a brief account of the charge and fine in the newspaper. The details were given to Bishop Jackson by a cousin of his who happened to be with the group at the temple excursion and who had to wait for the release of Brother West before he could go home. Bishop Jackson appeared at the appointed time and place in the office of the President Benson. Benson reprimanded him severely for embarrassing the church and embarrassing the stake president personally by his opposing vote when the authorities were being sustained. "I know you supposed reasons for this opposition," President Benson said, "but your conduct only serves to focus more attention on this unfortunate incident and to connect it with the church. And besides, this was personally embarrassing to me because I had selected Ivan West to be stake clerk." Benson continued by saying that this was all in the past and that the public attention was only made the matter worse. He launched into denunciation of Bishop Jackson for permitting men to hold positions in the ward who didn't observe the word of wisdom and who used a little profanity. The bishop listened to this tirade until Benson had finished and then had a few things of his own to say. "I think we are putting too damn much emphasis on the word of wisdom. We have bishops, high councilmen, and others holding positions in the church who are dishonest, won't pay their bills, write fraudulent checks, cheat and lie. It seems to me that the basic honesty and truthfulness should be the first consideration before inquiries are made as to whether or not they observe the word of wisdom 100%. When we advocate men in the priesthood for this or issue temple recommends, we ask them if they observe the word of wisdom, sustain the general authorities of the church, pay their tithing, and are morally clean. We never inquire into whether they have committed any crimes for which they should be in jail, or whether they have cheated the businessmen and their neighbors, or whether they have committed other dishonest acts. People outside of the church laugh at us and accuse us of straining at a gnat and swallowing a camel in the way in which we emphasize the word of wisdom. We have denied people position in the church because they smoke or drink coffee or otherwise occasionally violate the word of wisdom. But I have never known anyone to be denied a position in the church because he was dishonest. Maybe you consider dishonesty a relative matter. I know that President Grant thinks anyone who suggests we overemphasize the word of wisdom is an alcoholic and should have a lecture on the word of wisdom. I attribute this to him being senile and taking great pride in one of his few accomplishments. Benson interrupted at this point. "In other words, you don't sustain the president of the church." "Of course I sustain him," shouted the bishop. "But I don't believe that every time he orders his breakfast he has just had a fresh revelation as to what he should eat, or that every time he approves or disapproves a financial transaction in ZCMI or Hotel Utah, he has just spoken with God. I think he makes errors in his analysis of people and in everyday transactions and other matters that don't have anything to do with the running of the church. We have gone over this all before. I think that you place too much emphasis on the word of wisdom, and perhaps I don't put enough. I suppose that this is the difference between us. I can sum up my feelings very simply. I would rather deal with a man in or out of church who is basically honest and truthful, even though he might violate the word of wisdom in some particular, than deal with a man who is a liar or a cheat, even though he observed the word of wisdom to the very letter of the law." "I can't quarrel with that," said President Benson, "but there is no reason why a man can't be both honest and live the word of wisdom." "That's true," said Bishop Jackson, "but some of them are not honest, and the strictest observance of the word of wisdom does not compensate for dishonesty." The conversation terminated there, and the bishop left President Benson's office without much having been accomplished. They had gone over the same ground they had trod many times before. A month later, Ivan West had the good sense to ask to be relieved of his position in the stake. This was somewhat of a relief to President Benson, although he never would have asked for resignation. Since Bishop Jackson's negative vote, a number of people, directly or indirectly, had chided the stake president for harboring an embezzler in this group. No official church action was ever taken against West, and Bishop Jackson said good-naturedly that Ivan West was damned lucky President Benson hadn't caught him drinking coffee.